Imagine for a moment a world without art, without dance, opera, literature, poetry. That world would be a very, very dull place.
Today on the show, we have 42nd Street Pete, author of numerous books specializing in the area of grindhouse cinema. His most notable works include A Whole Bag of Crazy, Sordid Tales of Hookers, Weed, and Grindhouse Movies, his fictional trilogy, Gunfighters of the Drunken Master, 42nd Street Pete's Big Book of Grindhouse Trivia, as well as the magazine series Grindhouse Purgatory. He is also an advocate for the restoration and preservation of rare and underground 8mm and 16mm films with after-hours cinema, which finds these rare and forgotten films and transfer them over to the DVD format. He also has a YouTube channel where he discusses the history and his personal experiences with grindhouse and exploitation film subculture. Pete, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, my pleasure, dude. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad I was actually able to sit down and talk with you because, I was kind of doing a lot of research on exploitation films in general, starting about a year ago. Because, I mean, anybody who knows me, when I was 10, 12, I started going to the library every day after school, probably even earlier than that. And they'd always have all the, classic VHS and DVD movies there. So I just sat down and I'd watch the greatest films of all time, all those different, all those different Hollywood films that all those intellectual types like to critique and rate. And after I kind of watched all these mainstream films, I don't know, as I got older, my interest just turned to the stuff that's kind of in the corners that mainstream culture doesn't want to talk about.
Yeah, the dirty little secrets of exploitation films, independent film in general.
Yeah.
People ask me this question about when did I think things changed as far as film goes? I would have to say about 1963, 1964, because you had The Flesh Eaters, this little black and white film that actually showed flesh being peeled off the human body. Then you had H.G. Lewis and Dave Friedman come up with Blood Feast, which had something that had never been done before.
Yeah, first gore.
Then you had, for a fistful of dollars came in, this Western that just blew everybody away because it was so completely over-the-top violent and made our stuff look tame.
Yeah.
And then 68 was Night of the Living Dead, and 69 was The Wild Bunch. So there's a fistful of films that basically changed the course of filmmaking worldwide.
Yeah, and what's super interesting is how each one of those kind of genres kind of deconstruct what was popular media at the time. I know Herschel Gordon Lewis, one of his biggest gripes after he had gotten out of seeing the movie Psycho, is that he never actually saw the gore. And after he got done doing those camp nudie flicks, that was his inspiration to actually start doing gore. And you look at something like that, and you look how crudely it's done, like the scene where they ripped the tongue out and how they actually had to use a goat's tongue for that scene. I mean, they didn't have the special effects, and they didn't have the type of makeup and that horror films had going into the future. So just that kind of crude take on it. I mean, it really was shocking at the time.
Well, what really happened with Dave and HG was they had done the nudie stuff, and nobody was doing nudie stuff except for guys like them, like the S.S. Millard, the Roadshow guys. Yeah. So all of a sudden, Hollywood started incorporating the nude scenes in, major pictures. So it was like, well, gee, what haven't we done, or what could we try to do? And they came up with gore. And I luckily was privy to talk to both of these gentlemen and be, friends with Dave Friedman for quite some time until he passed away. Mm-hmm. But they never expected anything out of this stuff. They figured, all right, we did this, let's see what happened. Then when they saw that whole traffic jam to get into the drive-in to see this thing, they're like, holy shit, what did we just do? So then they did 2000 Maniacs, and I think it was Color Me Blood Red, and then basically Dave left. Dave was splitting out on his own to do certain things, you know, and Herschel stayed with the gore until he went into, I think it was direct mailing and then writing books about advertising and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, and that's one of the things that made Blood Feast super interesting is because Herschel Gordon, he wasn't a filmmaker. He, you know, by trade, he was a marketer. He was an advertiser. You know,
Right.
so I mean, really, you know, even when it came down to him, what was it? Didn't they file a bunch of complaints against the film to try and get it banned just to get the publicity for how, you know, ridiculous and over the top it was?
I never heard that, but I do know that, you know, this is what's lacking in film promotion today, that Dave was a master of ballyhoo. And they would just drum up stuff like, you know, if they got, you know, when Dave was doing the nudie stuff and things, if they ever
Yeah.
got raided by the cops, he talked the cops into being into the film. So he was like, he was a carny guy. You know, Dave could have been an executive at Paramount,
Yeah.
but he just loved the whole deal. And he said to me one time, he goes, I never could resist taking a sucker for a buck. And his other thing was never take everything, always leave something. You know, we sell them the sizzle, but never give them the steak.
Yeah.
Always let them have a reason for you to come back. That was the whole thing with him because, you know, they wanted people to see the films. But, you know, them, like just about everybody else who did this stuff, never saw anything past the theatrical run. It was like, okay, we made our money. We can pair it up with something down the road. Then all of a sudden it goes into a film vault and it gets forgotten about. These guys were fucking amazed when they found out that people were actually interested in this stuff.
Oh yeah, and you know, the one thing, and this is how I stumbled across Blood Feast, is that when I went to college, it wasn't too far from Peoria, Illinois. So you know, when I started getting into this stuff, one of you know, the first films that I found out that was actually debuted in Peoria was Blood Feast, and they were able to keep it at the drive-in there for months on end because it was such a big hit. And I want to say it was still playing the drive-in circuit, 10 years after it was released. So I mean, it just became I don't want to say iconic, but it definitely became infamous in certain circles.
Yeah, there was a story about, you know, I can't even, you know, confirm or deny it because I didn't go see it in '63 because I would have been 11 years old maybe. So, I mean, I saw the ads in the papers and stuff, but supposedly it played one of the theaters on 42nd Street for like 6 months straight.
Wow.
I mean, that's a city thing. So, well, that was the area where this stuff flew and flew big time, you know?
Yeah, because I mean, I guess when Grindhouse, you know, started to become, I don't want to say a cultural movement, but like, you know, a specific kind of subculture, it was all concentrated on that one street. I mean, how many different theaters were on 42nd Street?
Oh, about a dozen or so. Then there was things off to the side. You know, there was, you went up, there was like, the worst one was the Antco right on the corner of 42nd and 8th because it had, you know, exits that went out to the alley that ran behind all the other theaters going up the block.
Right.
And you had that one. Then you had the Victory, which was pretty much just always a porn grinder for some reason. And then let me think. The Rialtos 1 and 2. Then I think it was the Liberty. That was right next to Blackjack Books, too, in that proximity. Liberty's the one where basically Make Them Die Slowly ran for 10 weeks straight.
Wow.
And then left, then came back, ran another 3 weeks straight, and they kept bringing it back all the time. You went up, I think there was, the Empire, the Harris, and the New Amsterdam. That was on your right side going up. On your left side, let me see now. There was the only porn grinder in the world probably that was open at that point 24/7 was the Harem. That's the first thing you'd run into. And then, let me think. The Selwyn, the Times Square, the Lyric, the Apollo. There was something at the end, I know that. But those were the main ones I remember. And most of them were owned by this company, by the Brandt Corporation or the Brandts or something. Because they were actually like Broadway type theaters going back, into the turn of the century. But then when the Depression hit, they all bellied up, and then these guys came in and bought them on the cheap and just, started running films there. And then when you got into, let's see, you get into the 50s, I would think, with the AIP stuff and the double features, and that's where it really started pushing in. And then all the oddball stuff, like I said, the Flesh Eaters in the 60s. And the spaghetti westerns. I mean, everything ran through there.
Yeah.
And one thing that happened was that people aren't aware of, most of those movies open on a Wednesday. And the reason for that was, okay, it opens on Wednesday. Let's see what happens Wednesday night. Let's see what happens Thursday night. Okay, this thing ain't doing shit. Let's yank it and put something in for Friday that we know will draw.
Yeah, yeah.
So sometimes, you would see a movie, okay, I'm going to check it out Friday. And like, where is it? It's gone. So, and then a few of these were just run a couple of days for the tax write-off and pulled out.
Okay.
These old handful of British spy movies and other horrible shit that I've probably seen and really want to forget. Like there was one called The Second Best Secret Agent in the Whole Wide World, and it was always paired with something I want to see. And I'm like, I really don't fucking want to see this British piece of shit again, please. So, yeah, you get all that going. And like I said, the genre started, you had the spaghetti westerns in the 60s, the biker films, and then, things started getting progressively the women in prison stuff.
Right.
Love Camp Number 7, the first Nazi exploitation movie, which led to Ilse She-Wolf of the SS.
That's a classic.
Yeah. I don't remember any of those Italian ones playing there because somebody just asked me that question, and I said, I was even looking at some times tables because somebody came up with this whole film listing that went from like maybe 79 up until the 90s. And I didn't see any of that stuff on it, but, who knows? But, that would be a hard genre to push. They got away with Love Camp Number 7 because it didn't say, like, Nazi in the title.
Right.
And Ilse She-Wolf of the SS, well, once they saw the poster and Diane's tits, they didn't really give a shit. So... the other stuff, I really don't know. People were, the other thing was that, Graydon Clark's first film was called Nigger Lover. And that was on the marquee. Now it's retitled The Bad Bunch.
Right.
But, they could get away with shit like that. And, the whole thing, like I said, going back to the ballyhoo thing is, these guys, like, okay, Fred Williamson said he purposely called this film he made Boss Nigger because he knew it would draw heat.
Yeah.
And in drawing heat, it would draw people into the theater. So, you could never in a million years get away with that shit today.
Well, and it's also important to point out that, and, correct me if I'm wrong, but like really the grindhouse scene was given that jolt of energy by the blaxploitation genre just because, when you're dealing with an audience that's in the inner city, they need something a little bit grittier and more relatable than, whatever mainstream Hollywood or, whatever mainstream Western John Wayne movie Hollywood's pushing out.
Yeah, well, the whole thing was, people try to shit on that whole blaxploitation label, but the guy who made it was black,
yeah.
Melvin Van Peebles. And the whole thing was, he was working, he directed Watermelon Man with Godfrey Cambridge, and he used the money from that and also got a loan of $50,000 from Bill Cosby, believe it or not, to make Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song. Well, he made the thing, and the problem was nobody would touch it. So he went to Jerry Gross, whose company Cinemation had put out I Drink Your Blood, I Eat Your Skin, and a bunch of other shit. Mm-hmm. And Jerry and the MPAA hated each other. So he approached Jerry. Jerry came up with a number they could live with, and they put it out. And they said, the only way this is going to work, we got to be in people's faces with it and keep it in people's faces. So, a lot of the major newspapers wouldn't carry the fucking ads. So they, the tagline was rated X by an all-white jury because they slapped the X on it.
Yeah.
So basically, Jerry could get the shit in because he had the theater connections over there. And the best advertising is word of mouth because everybody wanted to see that. And that's, flipping back a minute, that's how I found out about Ilse She-Wolf for the SS, because somebody came in the bar, was hanging out, you got to see this fucking Nazi movie, this and that. Okay, we're sold. But going back to the blaxploitation thing, yeah, he kicked the door open, and then one of the major studios followed it with Shaft.
Yeah.
And then that opened the floodgate because, you had a star already. I mean, the first major black star was Woody Strode. So he had already he was in major stuff and got the big push from Lee Marvin into professionals. But Jim Brown was the guy they were trying to market. But, they did him. He was in Rio Conchos with Richard Boone and Stuart Whitman, which is one of my favorite Westerns. And then he, did the Dirty Dozen thing, and he got real, high marks for doing that. Mm-hmm. But then it was like, okay, we put him with Gene Hackman twice, sort of fizzled. We put him with, what the hell was it? Rock Hudson and Warren Oates and Ice Station Zebra and shit like that. They put him with Rod Taylor in Dark of the Sun. But where it seemed the whole thing shifted was when they put him with Lee Van Cleef and El Condor, which, as we were saying before we went on, that I think I'm pretty sure that was the first movie to get an R rating for violence and nudity and stuff like that. But from what I've heard about Lee Van Cleef, and he's a personal favorite of mine, he seemed to mentor these younger guys, and I think he might have told Jim a few things, like maybe tone it down, maybe you're going too strong, because there was rumors that he was rough to work with physically.
Yeah.
He broke Ernest Borgnine's foot in the split. So, in their fight scene. So it seemed that right after that film, all of a sudden, bang, it took off. He was doing a bunch of good stuff. Slaughter's Big Ripoff. He was bouncing around. He was getting, Escape from Devil's Island, Pacific Inferno. So he was making the rounds and, doing some really good stuff. And then the other guy that came in was, of course, Fred the Hammer Williamson with Black Caesar. So, and the other thing too was, people might shit on these films, but they opened the door for a lot of black guys to get work. Black men and women, Pam Grier, Coffey, Gloria Hendry. They needed black stunt people. They needed, black makeup artists. So, that opened a whole new industry. And, I met a lot of cool people to work. I mean, Sid Haig, and Pam Grier, they were inseparable for a bunch of films. They just worked on screen greatly. So, it was all good. It was just, but like any of these genres like this have a 5 to 8 year shelf life, and then they sort of peter out, because at the end of the blaxploitation stuff, you were getting a bunch of junky stuff. They were convincing Jim Kelly he could carry a film, which unfortunately he couldn't. Right, and they had some other basically no name, martial arts type guys that they tried to push and just didn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's the way it is with every genre, though. Like, it kind of corrodes itself after a while. Like, you reach the intellectual heights and social commentary of Easy Rider in the biker genre, and then towards the end you end up with something like Werewolves on Wheels. So I mean, every genre, it goes through its process. Well,
it's like what killed the spaghetti westerns.
What's that?
Blazing Saddles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the Italian filmmakers are a bunch of copycats, and they copy what they see in America. And all of a sudden, it was even the Lee Van Cleef one, Bad Man's River, sort of was drifted into comedy. Then they had the Trinity things that were all drifted into comedy. So that basically derailed the whole thing, because up until then, it was dead serious, we're going to blow your ass away type shit.
Yeah. So I guess to take a step back, I'm going back to 42nd Street. So if there was one corporation that kind of managed all of these different theaters, they would just buy the rights to these pictures, and then would they jump them around different theaters, or was there maybe one more dedicated to horror, one more dedicated to westerns, one dedicated to blaxploitation, that sort of thing?
Well, They nobody bought the rights to anything. They basically, they were distributors would come to them with films, that they would want to, market. And the thing was, everything that was big, and like I said, we didn't have it. There was no internet back in the 70s and the 60s, whatever, and even up toward the 80s, nobody was using the internet. So you had to use gimmicks to promote films. And one thing that these theaters did was they had these huge plywood mock-ups of what was going on in the film. Like Make Them Die Slowly is the best example, because they had the severed heads hanging there, the mutilated corpses. They had all these lobby cards, all these stills, and they had a monitor running the trailer 24/7. So on a street level, that just drew people in. And then the other thing was they used to have radio spots where, you're listening to FM radio, and all of a sudden it breaks in, the third recipient of the head transplant died today. go see Beast of Blood at a theater near you, that type of shit.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was like incessantly pounding on you where, you would want to go see this. Then they had like, the 30-second TV spots and things like that. So, the big thing was the poster would draw you in, because if you walk, I never looked at a theater times table when I was doing that. I looked up at the marquees and the posters and said, like, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, where are you spending the night tonight,
Yeah. So I guess,
And,
go ahead.
go ahead. No, they would, they would have huge mock-ups of things like when, Sabata came out. They had like a stand of him on the marquee of the theater, and underneath it said, Lee Van Cleef is Sabata. When, I'm trying to think, Equinox is the name of the film, but they threw it out on video as The Beast.
Okay.
That was an early anime thing with David Allen and a bunch of guys, and trying to think who directed it. The guy from WKRP that played Herb was in it. But, they had, these big monsters. And they had mock-ups of these monsters standing in front of the theaters. So, this was, and then when you went to the soft X and the hard X stuff, I mean, that shit was all over the place. Huge tits sticking out, duct tape over the chicks' crotches and things like that.
Right.
So it was like, it's such an assault on the senses walking up there that's how everything was promoted.
And it's like, it seems like, different theaters promoting these movies, but they're all owned by the same corporation. So it's like they could control, how they wanted the aesthetic of that entire area to be for the most part. So like, I mean, that even just walking up, looking at those big marquees, like you're going to draw foot traffic, towards it, not even, with the usual crowd, just to experience it.
Yeah. Well, Terry Levine, who owned Aquarius Releasing, his office, I believe, was over the Selwyn. So, and this is on the Dr. Butcher Cannibal Apocalypse DVD. He has an interview in there, which is great, he came up with some stuff that I didn't even think of. His office was right across the street from the other side of the thing. And when he saw what Make Them Die Slowly was doing, he wanted to top it.
Yeah.
So he bought Cannibal Apocalypse and took a pre-title sequence that Roy Frumkes had shot for some film that never got finished and used that and came up with Dr. Butcher MD. And I believe he was working with Rick Sullivan of the Gore Gazette at the time, because Rick was a film distributor too. And they built this operating room set up on a flatbed truck with bloody nurses, mutilated bodies, the whole bit. They drive around, the cops would bust them, they'd get locked up, Terry would bail them out, and they'd start all over again. And they also had an ambulance tricked out as the Dr. Butcher Bloodmobile, where they were driving around taking people's blood pressure. And I told Ian McCulloch this, and he goes, seriously? I never heard of that. And I go, well, you did the film. And he goes, yeah. He goes, but, we never knew it went over there and did this type of thing. And I said, yeah, they pushed it big time. It didn't do what Make Them Die Slowly did, but certainly delivered the really fucked up, gory shit that we all wanted to see back then.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's just like such a direct way to market too, because with something like that, not only are you promoting the story to the movie to the person who you're interacting with, but you're giving them a story that they're going to take to their friends, and they're gonna go around. Hey, you see this fucked up ambulance that they took my blood pressure. There was a bunch of bodies in there, bags of blood. It was crazy.
Yeah, you know Bob Murawski from Grindhouse Releasing, right?
I don't know him personally, but I've heard of him.
Okay,
yes.
you know Grindhouse Releasing.
Yeah, right.
Okay. He emailed me a picture of a theater which wound up, I thought it was a Liberty, but it was Rialto. And they were putting out pieces at the time on Blu-ray. And he said, why would they pair pieces with The Hills Have Eyes? And I said, because The Hills Have Eyes, everybody knew about The Hills Have Eyes. It was a proven draw.
Yeah.
So let's just say that Pieces really sucked. Being that The Hills Have Eyes was with it would make it not suck so much, because the people wouldn't feel disappointed because they get to see The Hills Have Eyes again. So actually Pieces didn't suck.
Yeah, Pieces is without a doubt one of the best chainsaw killer movies that, besides maybe the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's definitely top 5.
Yeah. But see, the whole trick these guys do, the distributors, it wasn't so much the theater owners. They would have to get the stuff from the distributors, but it was what? Okay, this is new. We don't know a shitting thing about it, but we know that this film, that if we stick it with it, would work it. So they were using, it's in one of the issues of the Grindhouse Purgatories. I took the weirdest pairings from the listings I had for 42nd Street. Like, here we go. The Street Fighter, Return of the Street Fighter, Slave of the Cannibal God. That's triple feature. Yeah, stuff like that. It was amazing what they were pairing. One I remember Animal House with Zombie. I mean, I'm like, it was weird, back in the 70s, but as you got closer to the 80s, the independent product over here dried up because basically, the mainstream companies were making horror films or buying, indie stuff, like especially the slasher films, which I fucking can't stand because there was so many of them.
Yeah.
And, all right, they had these things, but, to pair them up with different things, that's when all of a sudden they started bringing in the Italian stuff. Because that was basically 42nd Street's last hurrah as far as really fucked up shit was the Italian invasion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I don't know, a lot of the one thing that, folks need to understand about, the Grindhouse is that it was an artistic expression to push the boundaries as far as you could for the time and place. And I mean, without, that kind of splatter horror, the movies like Zombie, you'd never be able to have the companies would have never seen how profitable horror was at such a low cost to make, that you would have never had the explosion of, slasher films and horror films on the VHS market. And then it would have never gained as much mainstream approval, giving you something like The Walking Dead, which is on a mainstream network.
Yeah. Well, right after Jaws and Star Wars came out, Roger Corman said it best. They finally got it. We're screwed.
Yeah.
That's when they got it. But like, you still had theatrical at that point, and those theaters were still viable. So that's when I say the thing was after, when Dawn of the Dead came out, and all of a sudden Jerry Gross again brought in Zombie. And that sort of kicked open the doors for, okay, this stuff's really extreme and fucked up, and we can get it on the cheap because we can go over to Italy and get it.
Yeah.
We can bring it in. So, you had that. You had, they were going to push this one. It was going to be Twilight of the Dead, and then Romero sued. Then it became Gates of Hell, and it was City of the Dead, the Fulci stuff, then the Argento stuff. So this was stuff that nobody got away with before. And like I said, they get it on the cheap. And somebody said something about there's no way anybody could have slapped a fucking R rating on Carnivorous, a.k.a. Jungle Holocaust. There's no way anybody gave that an R rating. Somebody just slapped that on there to throw people off. Because these operators, they didn't give a shit. That was the fun part about 42nd Street in general, that there was such a criminal element involved in just about everything over there that nobody really gave a shit. They get away with murder.
Yeah.
What Terry Levine, came up with, and I never even thought it is, because everybody thought what killed it was, okay, the crack epidemic, the AIDS epidemic, the greedy realtors, whatever. The whole thing was, when the city people sat down and saw that for the square footage of that area and the tax revenue that was coming in, there was hardly anything coming in. They were pocketing everything. So, toward the end, that's why it just went to shit, because nobody was putting money into fixing everything up, because they all knew it was up. They were all going to go out. I can't remember anybody ever charging me sales tax for anything in a porn store. And I can't remember even getting a fucking ticket from one of those grindhouses. They just took your $1.50 or $3 and waved you in.
Yeah.
So that was the whole thing. It would all boil down to the almighty dollar. If they probably had paid off the right people and paid, enough to keep it going, it would have worked. But then, the whole thing was, it was getting dangerous too. The crack stuff, just people being fucked up in general, and the place was getting decrepit. There's a whole big difference between the 70s and the 80s. Like, I was over there, like I'd say, like 68, drinking underage, and hung over there until the early 80s, and that's when the big change came, where it just wasn't fucking fun anymore.
Yeah.
Get too dangerous. Plus, I got involved in the business anyway with selling shit, so I was only over. I didn't have really the time I wanted to spend to go to those things I get to place in Jersey too. So.
Well, I guess let me ask you about the vibe that was going on, in the Grindhouse scene. I guess kind of how it evolved. So, it's obviously it was obviously a party scene. You'd have different folks going in for triple features, bringing in bottles, stuff like that. What was it like there?
And you could smoke in there too, so nobody, you could smoke weed. Nobody gave a shit because they were smoking cigarettes.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess. Well, I guess also throughout the '70s too is when you had, Roger Corman did The Trip, and you had all these psychedelic movies. So I assume there's a lot of LSD use and a lot of different, party drugs getting used as well.
Yeah, I was just buds and suds myself. I didn't give a shit what anybody else did. I'd sneak a pint of wine or hard stuff in.
Yeah,
With the
yeah.
weed that I'm smoking right now. There was one theater called the Elgin, which was far away from that whole scene. And they created the Midnight movie down there, and it was like a 200-seat theater full of potheads. Who was going to tell them to put it out? You know?
Yeah, it's your bread and butter right there.
Yeah, but no, there's this whole thing about Quentin Tarantino, how he's got everybody convinced that he grew up in watching movies with a black audience in grindhouses, and when you do the math of his fucking age, all the shit was over by then.
Wasn't he from Tennessee?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see a great plethora of grindhouses in Tennessee.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
I
know?
think he's.
Then he said he went to California, and somebody was like, I said, dude, I'm not blowing my own fucking horn. I said, but okay, basically, I was dropped off at a kiddie matinee, which was 2 horror films, a Three Stooges short, and 4 Warner Brothers cartoons when I was like fucking 12 years old. That's how I grew up in this shit, and it was in a prominently black neighborhood.
Right.
And there was never any issues. I mean, fights would break out between assholes because fights break out between assholes. In grindhouses, fights would break out between assholes because of the fucking liquor and shit.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I got one story. I think I don't know if it made the last book or I wrote something about it. Getting this chick I was hanging out with, which was she was a barmaid / escort or whatever. She used to do diet pills, and she got all fucking wired on this shit. So we went to see something, and I don't know, something happened. She drew the ire of this black dude sitting in front of us, and she went, "What are you looking at, motherfucker?" And I'm like, don't. Then they go back and forth, and bitch slap, and I'm like, okay, no. And I'm like, dude, I'm out of here. And we went out the exit. I'm like, I ain't getting involved in this shit.
Yeah.
And then it was, oh, he was mean to me. And I said, no, it's the fucking pills talking. And then somebody was come out another exit, and I says, well, we're not going to lose the night. And I snuck in the other exit. It's another film. I think that was Satan's Black Wedding and The Brute Corpse. And that was a confusing fucking film because it was about the two brothers, somebody with a vampire ring, people getting bit, staked out, hot chicks covered with blood naked, and we never got to see Satan get married anyway.
Yeah.
And then the Brute Corpse, this is how fucked up Lisa was because she, like I said, whacked on pills. As soon as this thing started, I knew it was going to be a piece of shit because it looked like somebody backed a truck over the print. She thought it was going to be a Pam Grier movie, and I'm like, no, I really don't think so. It's not going to be a Pam Grier movie. I mean, it was okay for what it was because it had a lot of good character actors like Alex Rocco, Roy Jensen, Michael Pataki, and a few other people, but really a nasty fucking rape movie with mercenaries and shit.
Yeah, and I guess that's one thing that I mean, people nowadays, primarily maybe not my generation, but the generation before doesn't realize is that in this era as well, pornography was illegal. You couldn't make it, you couldn't sell it, so a lot of the times, these independent films would push the boundaries on that. I mean, primarily, what was it, the Girls Behind Bar movies, right? You had a couple of
I don't know who created that. Oh, the subgenre was always around because I got a black and white 60mm print I've yet to watch, Women's Prison, I think, and that's a 50s film. So it was around. It just got taken to a whole new level in the 70s when, Corman went to the Philippines.
Yeah. Yeah, he did, what was that, the big dollhouse he filmed down there?
Yeah, I think the first one was Women in Cages. It wasn't Jack Hill, it was Jerry De Leon. That was the first time Pam Grier worked there. And then it was, the big dollhouse and the big birdcage.
Yeah. The big birdcage had some awesome set design on it. I mean, just what they're able to do with, the raw elements of the jungle. But, the Philippines is where you can go and get beautiful jungle landscapes for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, if you want to see a good documentary, pick up Machete Maidens. It's a really good documentary in the Philippines.
I'm gonna have to check that out. Yeah, the Philippines. I mean, most of South America has had such an interesting history. So I guess you said that there was porn grinders as well. So were those are we talking like 8mm?
No.
Films in, like,
it was just a weird thing. The only one for a while on 42nd Street was the Victory. But you had these little, we used to call them storefront theaters and shoebox theaters. I mean, some of them were on the second floor. It was basically a scattered chair arrangement, a plywood partition with a 16 millimeter projector, and sometimes it would be like a feature without sound. There'd be a record player they'd set up or a tape player.
Yeah.
And just really strange little places. But, you know, then when you hit 72, when Deep Throat hit, and it's like, okay, we can actually get away with this shit, but it was still the whole gray area.
Right.
If you went down 8th Avenue past 42nd Street, there was a theater called the Cameo, and then there was the Capri, and originally it was the Eros 1 and 2, but one of them was a gay theater. Then the first one changed its name to the Venus, the infamous Venus, that was open all the time. So that's where basically all the porn was for a while. And then when things started going to shit in the 80s, all of a sudden every other theater was showing porn. The 8 millimeter stuff was strictly in the peep shows that were all over the place there.
Yeah.
Which was a whole different phenomenon. That sort of leads into how I got into this whole 42nd Street Pete character deal, when you think of it. Let me take a sip of this water here.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love you to go into that, how you kind of developed your persona and got more involved in the business.
Well, I always knew sex sold, and basically, growing up in the 50s and the 60s, there was no sex education. So I was selling, I don't know if you remember 8-track tapes, the most horrible fucking invention ever was in the music industry.
Oh, yeah.
I was selling bootleg 8-track tapes out of the trunk of my car. And, I knew what Stag films were, and I knew what they were expensive, but the guy I was getting the tapes from, I saw a box up there. So I'm like, oh, what do you want for them? And I think it was like $10 for color, $8 for black and white. So I got a couple of them. You couldn't get your friends, we got these fucking movies, right? So we're watching them.
Yeah, yeah.
So then I got the bright idea, why not sell them? So I made some connections, it was like anything else. The more you buy, the cheaper it gets. I had no fucking clue what any of this shit was. I mean, I had the Linda Lovelace dog film. I had her and other stuff. I mean, I had all this, stuff that right now is probably priceless, but yeah. I was selling it. So, that's how it started. And the whole persona, like I said, my whole thing was, I talk about going over there and shit. And it was always, you'd hear these stories about, well, I walked past this porn store. I walked past this peep show. No, I fucking went in because I wanted to see what was going on. So I admitted this shit, And then when Screw came out, I think that was, early 60s. I would have never known about Screw until they made a big deal about it on the Eyewitness News. So I had to go over and buy a copy. But I was like really young. And I gave some dude, money to go and get me a copy of Screw so I could see what that was all about. So Screw was basically, your roadmap to everything fucking evil and wicked in New York City. It was great. Written by Al Goldstein, who I had the privilege of meeting, and actually he helped me a few times in getting research and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But that was the whole deal. So, it was like Sin City, and I went to see this stuff. I checked it out. I bought porn. I screwed hookers. I did the whole bit because I had the Vietnam War hanging over my head back then. I was classified 1A by the draft board, so it could be like, guess what? Your country wants you to go fucking die.
Yeah.
So I always had that hanging over my head. So that sort of figured into me, I want to get drunk, I want to get stoned, I want to get laid attitude before I die.
Yeah, you want to live life.
Yeah, luckily it never happened, but, I spent the 70s doing all this crazy fucking shit, and then got in, the VHS business when that started. But, going back to how the character was, I had a video store called Past Midnight Video up in Rockaway, New Jersey, and I had met Mike Ferrani through Chiller, and, we were friendly, and I admitted to him that I was copying a couple of his tapes because his wholesale was my retail, $10, because that's the way it was. So we made a deal that I had a stash of these films laying around, I don't know, maybe a couple hundred of them. And I traded them, one film for one VHS tape, which made everybody happy. So then I asked him, I said, well, what are you doing to introduce this stuff? And he goes, oh, we got Bucky Beaver, this cartoon mascot. So I was living at Lake Patcon at the time, and I was stoned out of my fucking mind and got this idea. I put on a trench coat, set up a camcorder, put on a fedora, put on dark glasses, smoking weed, drinking. I think I pulled a gun at one point for some reason, putting over the whole, 42nd Street's dead, but thanks to something weird, video is alive. And I did this like 10-minute rambling, whatever. and mailed it to Mike as a joke. And keyword is joke because I never expected this to go anywhere. So I get a phone call about a week later, and he goes, "Oh, I got your tape." And I'm like, "Oh, he doesn't sound like he's too fucking happy about it." And he goes, "Oh, no, I think it's great." He goes, I want to put you on these intros." And I go, "Well, what do you want me to do?" And he goes, "I'm going to send you some, Stag Film VHS tapes. I want you to, watch them and, write liner notes for them." And I'm like, "Okay." So I get this stuff, and it's like, okay, I got 20 tapes, which is basically 40 hours of porn. So I try to do this the straight way. Like, I'm just going to watch this shit, and I'm like, oh, fuck, I can't do this. I mean, I've sold this shit. I've seen these films. I know what they are. Then I'm thinking, wait a minute. You're fucking going to blow something that might be cool. So I figured first thing in the morning, on fast forward, having coffee, taking notes. That worked. So I did this, and Frank Henenlotter, you know Frank Henenlotter, of course, from Basket Case.
Yeah.
He's the editor. So I send him the first batch, and he goes, "Okay, this is good." He goes, "But stop with the disgusting crab jokes. We're trying to sell this stuff, not gross people out." Okay. So we do that, and then Mike goes, "Well, how are your writing skills?" And honestly, at that point in time, I always wanted to write, but it was like, wasn't in the cards for me because I was always doing something else, trying to survive, hustling, whatever. So I said, okay, I guess. He goes, well, what do you want me to write? He goes, write something for the Blue Book about 42nd Street. Mm-hmm. So I came up with this thing called The Devil's Playground, and I basically hand wrote 36 pages and sent them to Frank and was waiting for the phone call to tear me into asshole because I didn't know how to type. So I get a phone call on my message machine. "This is Frank, Pete. This is great. This is wonderful. This is going to go in every period, every quotation, I'm like, what? So I call up Mike and I go, "I just got a thing." He goes, "Yeah, Frank just loves it. He's going to put it in." He goes, "This is great." So it went in, and that's how the whole thing started. And, the funny part was I showed up at Chiller Theater and Gimmick. People sort of loved it, became part of the whole deal.
Yeah.
We did a second Blue Book, which was more of the same. I did basically a Devil's Playground Part 2, 12 hours on the Deuce, like hanging out over there for 12 hours straight and going by a timeline of what I was doing. And got to interview Vanessa Del Rio, which was great. Never knew what to expect from that, but I got Frank gives me this whole thing, and I'm like, dude, I never interviewed anybody before, and I've heard through the grapevine that she could, get out of hand. And he goes, well, just keep the tape rolling. So I get 3 30-minute blanks. I had already met her at the video show in Atlantic City because at that point I was working for Liquidators. So I met her down there, introduced myself, set it up. So did my fucking homework, and I couldn't shut her up for 90 minutes. So now it's time to transcribe the tapes. And I call Frank and I go, "I'm sending you the tapes." He goes, "I don't have a tape player." I go, "Dude, I never did this. I don't want to fuck it up. I'll buy you a goddamn tape player." So I bought him a tape player, sent it over, and the second Blue Book came out, but it didn't really get, the kick I thought it would get. I thought it was head and shoulders above the first one, but, it's like anything else. The sequel can't beat the original.
Right. So
after that, we really had nothing to do. Then Mike Razzo from Alternative Cinema contacted me that he had picked up Nick Phillips feature films. And I'm thinking, all right, I've just done like how many hours of porn do I want to do this again? And I said, well, what do you want to do? And he goes, well, I would like you to write liner notes and do the, an on-camera, interview. So I said, all right. And he goes, well, we remade these with other girls, current girls. And I said, okay. All right, I get this shit home and I watch it and I realize I've seen these damn things over in New York before. And the thing with Nick's stuff was it was rather unique because he was one of the first guys to incorporate the fetish lingerie and the long, elbow-length gloves and the hats and shit. So I'm like, all right, I can dig this. Then I look at the remake and I'm like, no fucking way. I can't fucking deal with this. So I call Mike back up and I says, look, this is the thing I said. I'm not knocking what you're doing here. I said, the old stuff, the old school shit, no problem, I can do it. I said, I hate to say it, but I can't put over the remakes. Okay, so, we make the deal, we go in, so I do it. The next thing that came up with, Nick had done 2 horror films that had never been released on DVD, Criminally Satan, Satan's Black Wedding. Mm-hmm. So I got to do them. They flew Nick out. Nick was a cool guy. We met, but the whole thing was doing audio commentary with him. I had to stick him with a fork because he really wasn't into the horror films. But we did one of his titty films and he perked right up. So it was sort of like, almost like the Lewis and Friedman thing. We did this for the money and it worked. That type of thing. So then I think we did a couple other ones. And then I said, you know something? My ex-wife calls me up and she goes, I was going through some shit and I found a wooden crate and I think it's yours. And I go, well, why do you say that? She goes, there's these 8mm films in them. And I go, I'll be right over. So completely forgot about this fucking thing. Pick this thing up. There's maybe 50 films in here. I'm like looking through these and I'm like, oh, fuck, the Linda Lovelace ones, the Candy Samples ones. So I called up Mike and I said, I want to have a sit down with you. And he goes, what about? I said, I want to put out 8mm stuff on DVD, but I want to put it out the right way. I said, because not knocking what anybody's doing, but they're just slapping shit out there. No backstory, no history. And I go, when you think about it, this shit's the great-great-grandfather of 16mm, VHS, Beta, Laserdiscs, DVDs, now Blu-rays. So I said, I just want to try something. He goes, everybody talks. Nobody puts up money. I will say I threw an undisclosed amount of money on his desk, and I said, match it and we're in. So we did the first 8mm Madness DVD, which worked. And instead of, taking any of the money out, I said, let's do 2 more. So I wanted to do one with recognizable stars. So I did Superstars of the 70s Stags, and I did one with the European loops, the Eurotrash collection. Mm-hmm. So that just morphed into a whole bunch of shit that basically I was doing. I just did I don't know if you saw the last YouTube channel, the show.
Oh, yeah. No, I saw that you had posted a video just a few days ago. I've not watched it yet.
I went over all the DVDs because people are starting to catch on to this whole thing, which I'm amazed at. I got over 30 releases out on this stuff. The loops, the features, the other things. So it's not blowing my own horn because I don't really keep track of this shit, and I probably don't have any fucking ego on it. I don't know if anybody would argue that point because I don't think I do, but It's pretty cool. I got a bunch of this shit out there that's available to the public that basically nobody else has. Or nobody's done it the way I've done it, that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, I guess let me ask you, how different are the Stag films of back in the day compared to I mean, pornography. You could find absolutely anything you ever want to find pornography wise today. But I guess how different were they back then? Was it just more like girls dancing, or was it softcore?
Well, it's the whole segue was you had the soft stuff, which basically was nudie stuff and simulated stuff. But then most of the loops were hardcore, and what is unique about them is they do some really fucking strange ass shit that, not that it's illegal or anything, but you can never get away with it today. I mean, there's one of a fucking Yeti walking around with a skull cock, that type of shit. There's one with Batman and Robin, and at the end you're convinced that these two are going to go down on each other. I had one with the Lone. I had a lot of stuff I couldn't do because we just hit that snag where nobody was buying the shit, and I had to just get rid of some of the loops, but. I had 3 series called Extreme Sleaze Showcase, which really went pretty well because that was all the B&D and the S&M stuff.
Yeah.
All the weird shit, midgets, transsexuals, whatever. So, it was like the whole thing was so Wild West that they could, basically get away with anything. The only thing was, like anybody else, don't fucking show me anything with fucking kids in it because I'll put you in the fucking emergency room.
Yeah.
And luckily, I've never come across any of that shit. But, you ran the gauntlet with the animals, the fucking horses and the pigs and shit, which, of course, we couldn't do anything with that either.
Yeah,
but
no one
that's the whole, the whole weirdness of it. And then you see people pop up in it, like the chick Lucy Grantham from Last House on the Left was in one of the loops I had.
Really?
With Sean Costello. So, it just was different. And, this was like a proving ground for a lot of cameramen. Like, Carter Stevens started with some of this stuff. He was actually in a few loops. Of course, Jamie Gillis, Sean Costello, and a lot of these guys, became, porn directors. So it's just interesting from that point of view that, you could get away with a lot more then. And it was it was raw. And the whole thing was what people don't fucking get was you had guys like Arbola, Dave Ruby, Gillis to a certain extent. These guys just like the average fucking guy.
Yeah.
And in being that way, the guy watching the porn film had that faint hope that, he's just as average as these guys. He has that faint chance of getting laid. Now you got guys with 14-inch cocks, huge fucking balls, all jacked up and shit. Like, hey, that ain't fucking competition. We lost,
Yeah, well, I guess I don't know. When did that start? When Stallone was doing porn? What did he do? The party at Kitty and Studs?
Yeah, that was all softcore shit that basically got him out of getting drafted, that type of thing. But that, the weird part was that's what got Frank Zappa out of getting drafted too. That he did a fucking loop or something, and somebody fucking found it, and that got him. He couldn't get drafted.
Really? So why wouldn't that get him drafted?
He got arrested.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
he got busted for it.
Wow.
I remember reading it in one of his biographies that they just did something to do quick money and they got fucking caught.
Wow. So, I don't even think I really don't think being arrested would get you out of a draft if they did it nowadays. That's for sure.
No. That would probably be a prerequisite. Not knocking anybody. Just the way there was a whole thing. When I don't know how they work this, but you've seen it in fucking juvenile delinquent movies that they always said you can go to jail or join the army, that type of shit.
Yeah.
So maybe that existed in a certain period of time, maybe in the 50s or something like that. But I don't know now because, what he did was basically a sex crime, so they wouldn't want him. That type of thing.
Man, crazy how that is actually considered a sex crime because, I mean, I don't know. I come from an era when, pretty much 1 out of 5 girls I know has an OnlyFans account. So it's like, it's like sex work, if you want to call it that, whether it's, solo stuff or not. Sex work has become so prevalent that, particularly after, after COVID and, the economy, basically crashed, so many people I know who have actually, gone into that kind of work to make ends meet. And, honestly, it was one of their first choices to do it, too. So it's just become, a lot more prevalent and a lot more accepted.
Well, back then it was like, the thing was, and like I've met a lot of these people. I mean, I consider like Annette Hines, Jeannie Silver, Debbie Evans, Vanessa, and a couple other people. We're friendly with each other. We've done panels and stuff like that. And we keep in touch. And it was like, they needed a certain modicum of acting ability to make this, give it the socially redeeming value. The funny part about that, if you look at all Nick Phillips films, most of them all have downbeat endings, suicide, deaths, all kinds of other weird shit. They were all playing, we had to have the socially redeeming value to get it out. And then for whatever reason, it just sort of like let loose in the 80s with the A. We're just getting away with everything short of fucking snuff films,
Yeah. Well, I
Crazy.
think that was, you think that was more just because of the switch of format into VHS, because it just made, owning things a lot more easier. You didn't need a big projector. You didn't need a screen. All you needed was a VHS player or a Betamax player if that was the format you chose.
Well, we're talking early 80s, and what happened was there was a big fucking shift in like, we had all this stuff out. You had Hot Chicks, you had this, you had that. You had a certain amount of, a couple B&D films out there, but then all of a sudden, this whole Avon thing started, the Avon chain, where they were like, the Avon 7, the Avon 42nd, these small theaters and shit. And what happened was they were gauging, what people were reacting to. So they decided to create films catered to these like really fucked up, B&D, S&M, torture type scenarios.
Okay.
And they, one of them was, Carter Stevens directed Wicked Schoolgirls and a couple other ones, but it was with the premise that he would direct a separate B&D scene, to make this work at a certain place.
Right. So
the story I heard was that they had this guy, Phil Prince, who said he could do it cheaper, and he came up with some of the most fucking twisted shit. This was the stuff the Meese Commission used as the most vile and horrible, example of mob-influenced pornography.
Yeah.
So, there's a whole myth to that whole thing that writer Bill Landis put out, where basically everything he said was sadly untrue about it because people had dug things up. And Phil Prince, nobody knew what happened. According to what Landis wrote, he was doing life in prison for a murder of an associate in front of the Bryant Theater. But that wasn't the case. He, got in a fucking stupid ass robbery where he shot a fucking ice cream clerk, and him and his buddy were all fucked up, and it was like a Keystone cops chase all over Manhattan. and he went away for a while. Then when he got out, he went up to New England and became a truck driver and got in an accident and broke his back, and he was in a wheelchair for a good many years. But he just did an interview for the Rialto Report where he debunks everything that was said. And he goes, look, he goes, I did this stuff. And he goes, I was doing a lot of coke and, things like that. And he goes, but as far as what this guy wrote, he goes, it isn't fucking true. None of it's true. He goes, I didn't kill anybody. I don't know where any of this stuff's coming from. And it's like, the weird part was this guy badmouthed people like Jamie Gillis, Carter Stevens, a bunch of Joel Reed, other people. I met all these people, and the whole thing was they were flabbergasted that this guy Landis opinion of them when they basically never had anything to do with him. So I know he's held up as like the poster child of the 80s, sort of, as a writer with that Sleazoid Express thing and stuff like that.
Right.
But the bottom line was the guy was a huge, huge fucking drug abuser. And, nobody lies more than a fucking junkie. I hate to say it. But, be that as it may, unfortunately, a lot of this shit, that he had said was debunked as lies. And it sort of sucks because, I sort of read a lot of the stuff that the guy wrote, and I saw like glaring inconsistencies, but he had a sharp eye for what was going on in the area. He had a remarkable memory as far as how these theaters looked inside and out.
Yeah.
Where I don't, because I was always fucking drunk, and I admit it. So, I mean, I looked at the marquee. Okay, that's cool. I'm going in here. I never took wind of the decor. I just actually wanted to know where the restroom was in case I really had a piss. So
yeah. So let me ask you.
Yeah.
I know one of the myths that kind of goes around is that like a lot of these like independent films of that era or the grindhouse exploitation pictures, there's always myths that like it was financed by the mob with I guess money laundering intent. But is there any myth to that where the mob actually making certain kinds of grindhouse movies?
Yeah, the porn. They controlled the porn. The other thing was that the people that did Deep Throat, that released Deep Throat, I'm going to pronounce the last name wrong, Perino, I think, the Perino brothers. They started Bryanston Pictures, which released the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a bunch of Andy Milligan's films, The Human Factor, and things like that. And they released them basically on the premises they thought they were going to fucking lose money, but they didn't. So they never paid anybody. That was their big thing, because they had told Gerard Damiano, who did Deep Throat and The Devil and Miss Jones, when he wanted more money, they were going to break his knees. So, that was the rough end of it. These guys controlled it, and, basically most of the porn, in New York was made by the mob, and it was like a low-key thing. And Sharon Mitchell had said during our Q&A that she goes, they treated us well. They treated us like queens. We were well paid. I mean, they owned all that stuff over there. It was all, when the guy who invented the Peep Show started his own thing and they found out it worked, he found all his machines out on the street. And then he had to cut a deal with the mob. But in cutting the deal, he opened himself up to more money because he could branch out in different cities and things.
Yeah.
So it's like they always said, as long as everybody's making money, everybody's happy. It's when they're not making money or everybody's unhappy. I mean, the one guy who controlled the whole thing was a guy named I think it was Robert DiBernardo. They called him DB, and he wasn't a maid. He was that was his thing, but basically he didn't have a crew. There wasn't a whole whatever. I'm sure he had something going on with liquidators, because I know he was in there once. Mm-hmm. He was a low key guy who just was a good businessman. Unfortunately, John Gotti it was an unauthorized hit or something that took him out, which really shouldn't have happened. It was over a $25,000 debt that was owed to him, and got fucking stupid. But that was sort of the downfall of the whole thing with infighting and shit like that.
Yeah. That was towards the end of the
funny part was the guy who started it, Papa of the Peeps, Marty Hodis. They had another guy named Bobby Soretsky, and there was a whole big deal with 3 people with a murder for hire deal. There's a book called Times Square, if you can find it anywhere, which pretty much documents that whole thing. But the weird thing was Soretsky owned all these mini bookstores, like they were like wedged in between other stores and shit. And I can remember going over there, like, when I was in high school and shit, to buy, we were looking for real porn. You really couldn't get it at that point. But if you hinted that you had some money, they take you in the back room. So this guy sidles up to me, and I'm like the spokesman for the group, and he goes, "What? I'm looking for something little." Oh yeah, come with me. And he's got his arm around me, and he's bringing me in the back room, but at the same time, he's patting me down to see if I got a gun or a badge or something.
Right.
So you go in there, and of course, this shit's jacked up like 7 times the cover price, but it's hardcore, so we bought it. And then I had the epiphany about a year and a half ago that was Bobby Soretsky, because I saw a picture of him in some newspaper thing. I'm like, motherfucker, that's the guy that fucking brought me in the back room. So, you run in, it's just odd how many different people I've run into over the years. My philosophy was, you never know who you're sitting next to drinking with.
Yeah.
I was sitting there, something happened one night, and I had to go outside and straighten something out, and I go back in, I'm all pissed off, and this guy sitting next to me goes, that was pretty good. I like the way you handled that. I'm like, okay, let me buy you a drink. Okay. So the guy leaves, and I'm like, okay, what was that all about? And then the guy that was with him, I knew, and he sidles over, and he goes, hey, he liked what you did. And I go, not for nothing. Who is this guy? And he told me he's a fucking professional hitman. He said, if what just happened to you happened to him, he goes, that guy be found 3 days later, face down in the swamps. So I'm like, okay. But I just had like the weird, even working at Liquidators, and that's a notorious place. But, I was sitting in there one day, and this guy used to come in, he looked like, he knew what he was doing. His name was Mike Black. Yeah, right. And we're sitting there bullshitting, and he goes, something, that Giuliani's got to go. And I'm like, yeah, I know, he sucks. And he goes, no, he's got to go big time. We're going to make him go. And he's basically telling me they're going to put out a hit on Giuliani. And I'm like, okay, I don't fucking know anything. Then 2 weeks later, 9/11 happened.
Wow.
So, yeah. But it's like, like I said, I don't know what it is. I must be easy to talk to or something like that. But just like some of the weirdest shit happens, especially with Liquidators. Mel Brooks came in there one day.
Really?
And I was standing by the counter. I turn around, and I go, and he goes, oh, shh. He goes, I want a copy of that movie in the window, Gung Ho. Could you get it for me, please? I'm like, yes, sir. Here you go. Thank you. That was it. Didn't want to be noticed. I ran into Ox Baker selling shit on the corner and made the mistake of letting him know where I worked. And he used to come in and haunt me all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like Ox. Ox was good, but, Ox doesn't talk. He bellows. Used to run into, unfortunately, Ron Jeremy now and then all the time, which, now he's in jail, so...
Yeah, and I figured that was only going to be a matter of time before he got Me Too'd, because, he's Ron Jeremy, he's, adult icon, so I figured it was only a matter of time, unfortunately.
No, what happened, he did some shit.
Did he?
Part of the stuff that was going on when I was doing these Q&As with these actresses was, I always used to get them aside the night before, and say, what don't you want to talk about so I don't fuck this up? Mm-hmm. And unanimously, it was always, don't bring up Ron Jeremy. So he was not well liked in the business, and he got nastier as he got older, and he was hurting people. That was the whole thing. So had nothing to do with him being an adult icon. Basically, when Jamie Gillis was alive, we were doing shit at the Pioneer. A fan got in touch with him. He came in. We hit him in the audience. I think the fan paid him $200. I was doing a Q&A, and I asked the Jamie Gillis question. I said, well, maybe Jamie Gillis himself can answer it. The fucker came up, did an hour Q&A, hung out, signed autographs, came to Wasteland with us, was a great guy. Ron Jeremy, I want $5,000 to walk around the corner. Fuck you, Ron.
$5,000?
He wanted $5,000 to walk around the corner and appear.
That is ridiculous. No
Yeah,
no one's going to pay him $5 to do that.
Yeah. But, I don't know. They were doing something. I was booked at a show down in South Jersey. It was a trade show, and he was one of the headliners. Guys came down from Connecticut to see him, and were asking me if I knew anything. I said, dude, I'm only running a fucking booth for a company. I don't know. I wish I could tell you. The fucker didn't show up till 8 o'clock at night. So, yeah. Not a nice guy.
Yeah, I feel like that's what happens as a lot of folks get older, is they just become more jaded, more cynical. I mean, you could say the same thing about Cosby too, but I don't know. I was talking to Roby Gorin, who's a writer on the Cosby Kids, and even he said that Bill Cosby was one of the worst people to work with ever. He was just real condescending, real egotistical. But I don't know. I think that's just what happens over time. Certain people just become more cynical.
Yeah, well, I don't know. There was a whole thing. He was somebody said I was full of shit for saying this, but I know it happened, that he was trying to buy the Little Rascals library and get rid of it, and the Amos and Andy stuff and get rid of it.
Really?
He thought it was racist. Yeah, he don't really like white people. I think he said that once, too. You know, me, I ain't got a racist bone in my body. If you want to play the card against me, I'll play it against you.
Yeah.
That's all. So I was on the phone one day in Liquidators, and like these two black dudes walk in. I said, I'll be right with you. And the guy goes, if I was white, you'd be off that phone. I'm like, okay, that's it. I hung up. I said, all right, now I'm off the phone, motherfucker, and I'm not selling you shit. Get the fuck out. And then, of course, they run up to my boss, Norman. Norman comes back. I said, dude, he played the race card with me. He can go suck my white dick. That's all. And then finally I straightened the fucking thing out. I ain't a racist, but don't fucking throw it back in my face. My people didn't own slaves. They didn't get here till the 1900s, and there were a bunch of Italians, and they got the shit fucking beat out of them too, because that's the way it was. So,
well,
I don't play that. I don't play that fucking game.
Well, that, and I think that's because, you know, you grew up with urban culture. Like, you grew up on the streets, so, you know, I mean, you know, I'm sure that line that he fed you would have worked, you know, with somebody from the suburbs who, you know, had no, I don't know, had no experience with African American culture.
I sort of lived in the suburb. I sort of lived in the suburbs, but I gravitated toward that area because that's where the shit was. You know, that's where the movie theaters were, and like, you know, I worked, you know, a lot of different fucking jobs and things like that. I worked with, you know, multi-ethnic fucking people, and we used to rag on each other. This, you know, we tell race jokes to each other, and there was no malice involved. We were just breaking each other's balls, and if it went beyond breaking fucking balls, we walked out in the back and slugged it out. That was all. Yeah. Never went that fucking far. Everybody's so goddamn fucking sensitive today. You can't make fun of each other. I mean, I had something. I got suspended from Facebook for calling somebody white trash.
That's ridiculous.
That's the new N-word now, white trash.
Well, you know what I think a big deal of that is that, like, I know younger generations, like, whenever like something like that would happen, they wouldn't go out back and slug it out, you know, and because they didn't do that, you know, they're seeking with other ways to find that resolve. But I mean, I don't know, you know, if you're talking shit with, you know, with another man in particular, you know, if it gets to that point that you actually become, you know, offended, like you either get an apology or you fucking knock him one. And that's just, you know, I mean, it's more of an old school mentality, but I mean, sometimes it's the best mentality to have.
Yeah, I was never a good fighter. I didn't excel at that. I mean, if we got into it, you'd know you were into it, but I never, like, you know, it was never, like, my thing. It's just, like, I'd rather just fucking back off and not fucking get killed because, you know, even back then, you never know if anybody was going to pull a fucking piece on you, too, so.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean,
everybody, you know, like, I love the whole romanticizing the bar fight and the movies things and shit like that, but I've seen a couple of them break out. It's quick, it's mean, and it's nasty, and somebody really gets fucked up at the end of it.
Oh, yeah, particularly if bottles are involved. If you get hit with a bottle, that is not breaking over your head nicely. That is going to bust you up, particularly if it's like a big liquor bottle.
Ian Rotten told me how to break a bottle over somebody's head without fucking cutting them. Hit them with the label up first, because the label's glue will hold the glass together.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, man,
not
that's
that
a good
I fucking
trip
tried, but, you know, I'm not Ian Rotten, Deathmatch King, so...
So I guess to take a step back then, you know, you've pretty much seen every Grindhouse flick that's been out there. Let's go through a few genres and then, I don't know, I guess for the listeners, you know, folks who want to get into it, we could lay down which ones are the ones that are worth watching and which ones are the ones that aren't. Because, you know, there is a lot of material out there. So I guess the first, like, real Grindhouse genre would probably be Westerns then, right?
Yeah, the American Westerns, you know, that was like with the guys coming back from World War II were watching, like, you know, the Hopalong Cassidy and shit like that. But then they graduated, you know, when they became, you know, you had enough John Wayne and enough Randolph Scott. But I think the guy that really kicked it up was, you know, Peckinpah, you know, because, you know, he had done the TV stuff and he had done the Westerner, was more realistic. But then he did Ride the High Country. And, you know, that was Randolph Scott's last film, and Randolph Scott quit acting after that because he said, literally, I cannot top that. Let me go out on top.
Yeah.
So that good. But then, you know, you had Rio Conchos, which I brought up before, which was pretty violent. You know, then you had the Wild Bunch. Then, of course, the Wild Bunch inspired a bunch of stuff. So that was always there. I mean, you know, there was always, you know, everybody jumps on a thing, and it's like, there's got to be a certain amount of action and less talking in the Western whole thing, and that's where it worked. Where, you know, like there was other ones that were like duds, like 5 card stud, some other ones, but for the most part, they want the action stuff. If you were going to start, we're going to say like what I recommend. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah. I guess which ones would you consider essential watching for folks getting into it?
Okay, like Rio Conchos, Young Fury, if you can find it, because it's a juvenile delinquent western. I think it might be on YouTube. I think it's public domain.
Okay.
Let me think. Of course, The Wild Bunch is required viewing. Ride the High Country. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Let me see what else. Even the last couple John Wayne ones, like Big Jake, that was pretty good.
Yeah.
Duke had up the ante a bunch. Those are another one. Yolanda's Raid, the Bronson one, Chato's Land, and Red Sun, of course, which is an international western.
Yeah, Red Sun's phenomenal.
Yeah, those I'd recommend. Okay, next one.
Now, were a lot of those like more traditional westerns found in like those theaters, or was it really more of the push of the Italian western and the spaghetti western, I should say, that really filled the grindhouses?
The spaghetti westerns came in, I believe, around '64, and the one that made the impact, of course, was Fistful of Dollars.
Right.
So that opened the whole thing. There was some that ran and some, like Django, went in and out for some reason, and I don't know why. I don't think it lasted a week, and it sort of got lost in the shuffle, which was completely insane because he was the machine gun.
Yeah.
Walking with the machine gun. See, I didn't see Fistful of Dollars until I was in high school, and that was probably '68, and they double featured it for a few dollars more. So that's when I really got into Lee Van Cleef. And then, those, the three, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly was the big one. And then it was like, all right, who's going to go fill Eastwood's boots, because Eastwood's going back to Hollywood, which is another one, Hang 'em High, another western that's essential.
Right.
So, and a side note about Hang 'em High, I think the studio brass was sort of nervous about Eastwood because they saw how he drew with the spaghettis, but they didn't know whether it would translate to over here. So they loaded Hang 'em High with Bruce Dern, Ben Johnson, Dennis Hopper, L.Q. Jones, Ed Begley, Pat Hingleton, just packed it up with basically character actors that if Clint sagged, they'd pick him up.
Yeah.
So, that was a type of thing. Then, right after The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, it was like, okay, who's going to be the next big thing? Lee Van Cleef. And what I didn't know until recently was they shot the big gun down between for a few dollars more and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So Columbia had picked it up and just did a horrible releasing job on it because it was missing a bunch of shit. But he became it for a while. They tried other people. They tried Ed Burns for a couple films. Trying to think what the whole thing was, if you were an American actor and you weren't doing too well, you could get work over there. When they were doing Once Upon a Time in the West, see, Bronson was another guy. He was considered for all three of the Dollars films, and he turned them all down.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm glad
then he does Once Upon a Time in the West. Well, what Leone wanted to do was he wanted to get Eastwood, Van Cleef, and Wallach back to be the three guys that met Bronson at the train.
Yeah.
And guess who didn't want to do it?
Clint Eastwood.
Right. So that went down the shitter. So we got Jack Elam, Woody Strode, and Al Mullock. And the thing was, because of what Lee Marvin did with Woody Strode and the Professionals, basically Lee Marvin told Woody, take off your shirt and just wear your vest. You'll take the attention off everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So Woody got $10,000 to do that one bit for that one film. But in doing that kicked open the door for him to work overseas for doing a ton of films.
Yeah.
So, that worked for him. But, the other one with Lee Van Cleef would be Sabata. That was like the pinnacle. And then Day of Anger, which for the American release, they cut almost 20 minutes out of it to get it down to 90 minutes for a drive-in slot. So luckily all this shit's available now, on Blu-ray. It's, full featured and all that. But
yeah, full director's cuts.
Yeah, as far as what I would recommend in spaghetti westerns, of course, any of the Leone stuff, and then the Big Gun Down, Sabata, Day of Anger, El Condor, Any Gun Can Play, Payment in Blood. What the hell was the other one? Face to Face, Requiem. There's a whole bunch. A good buddy of mine, Mike Hass, puts out the Spaghetti Western Digest, which you can get on Amazon, and he's teeth deep into this thing, a hell of a lot more than I am. And he knows some great stuff, so that's what I would go with.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, you know, every time I rewatch it, like Once Upon a Time in the West is probably my favorite Western of all time. I mean, it just like deconstructs the Western mythos, you know, and the whole, you know, moving West manifest destiny. And it does it in such an intelligent way, too.
Yeah, that was like the segue of, you know, the Old West to the New West.
Yeah, because the neo-Westerns and really the deconstructionalist Westerns probably started in what, like the late 70s into the 80s?
Yeah. Then I heard he had to straighten out Jason Robards once too.
Really?
Yeah, he showed up drunk and Leone says, "No, we can't do this. Either you're going to do it sober, or you're fucking gone." And then Robards straightened up.
Yeah, there's I don't know, there's also something about those like Leone Westerns too. I mean, you know, rest in peace, Ennio Morricone, without a doubt one of the best film composers of all time.
Good run. 91's a good run. My mom's 91, so yeah, it's a good run. And those films would have been nothing without him.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, primarily that one. I wouldn't say it's the opening scene for Once Upon a Time in the West, but the big reveal of the villain. You know, when like you see that young family just get gunned down, and then you know they do like that wide angle like shift around just to reveal Henry Fonda's cold eyes. Like the score just matches that scene perfectly, and like what a shocking scene too, because Henry Fonda had never played a villain before.
That's what tanked the film in America.
Really?
On its initial, it didn't even last a week. I never got to see it in the theaters. It just, you know, I thought, oh, this is going to be great. Bronson, all these guys, and all of a sudden, bang, it went the week and went because the American public could not buy Henry Fonda as a bad guy.
Oh, but he's like,
is that fucking amazing or what?
I mean, and like, not only does he play a villain, but like Frank is without a doubt one of the best film villains ever put down. But I think a lot of it also has to do with the fact that he had, what was it, like a couple months before, he had just won the Oscar for playing Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
So that's a radical departure. But I mean, I could see why he chose to do it as well. You know, it keeps him fresh, so he's not typecast.
Well, you know what it was. Actually, he was the guy that Leone originally wanted for the Lee Van Cleef part, and for a few dollars more.
Okay.
And what happened was, Leone came over, and you know, of course, Henry Fonda, who the fuck is this guy? So it didn't work, and then Bronson was approached. Of course, he blew it off again. Who else? Charlton Heston was approached. Lee Marvin was gonna take it, but then got cat blue. And then James Coburn was going to take it, but then wanted more money. And the odd thing is, Sid Haig might have been involved, but Sid Haig told me a story about how he roughed up Leone in a bar.
No.
During some kind of thing with him and Lee Marvin or something. So what happened was, and this is the legend, that they were in a bar and Lee Van Cleef had quit acting. And he walked in out of the rain, and Leone recognized him from High Noon. So supposedly there was $15,000 in a valise that was shown to Van Cleef, and the next day he was on a plane. I think that's how they got the title for a few dollars more. That's the legend, you know. So.
Wow. Yeah, I did not know that. That's an interesting factoid.
Yeah, but that he always wanted Fonda. You know how he got Fonda? Because of Eli Wallach.
Yeah.
Because Eli Wallach told him, you know, he's good to work with. You should go do this.
Huh. Now what?
Then unfortunately, he fucked Eli Wallach over. That was the see when they were doing Duck You Sucker, Fistful of Dynamite.
Mm-hmm.
That was supposed to be Eli's role.
Oh, really?
And what happened was, I guess it was Paramount had Rod Steiger under contract. Picture, so they basically told Leone, you're stuck with Rod, and then Eli had quit a film to do this thing, and then basically was told, well, I can't do it, and he's like, well, whatever. So that's what happened with that. It was supposed to be Eli in that thing.
Oh wow, I did not know that. That's well, I mean, like Eli Walsh as well, man. Like he's one of the best character actors of that era. Like he just kind
Oh
of,
yeah.
I mean, even what was the last film he appeared in? Wasn't it Mystic River? He plays like a little
Yeah, him and
shopkeeper.
he and Clint were still tight because they went back when they did that big restoration of the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and they had to do the voiceovers.
Oh really? Okay.
Yeah, the only one that was of course wasn't alive was Van Cleef, and they had to get a voiceover expert to do his voice. So
Really? So let me ask you: are there original cuts still of the original audio for the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly?
yeah, but probably see that was everything was shot in whatever actor's language was there, and then it was all looped after that.
Yeah.
See, they said like Van Cleef lived over there, so it wasn't too bad. But there was another one. Remember this horrible fucking movie, God's Gun?
No, I didn't see that one.
Don't. It's terrible. Van Cleef plays twins. One's a priest, and Richard Boone's in it. But they said that this was when Boone was starting to get real bad with the fucking booze.
Yeah.
And before he could do his dialogue, he stormed off the set, so somebody dubbed it in. It's not even him.
Really?
Because somebody told me, well, reason that Richard couldn't do it was because he had throat cancer. And I said, well, I heard that from somebody else too. But then I just was reading this thing that he told people he was going to be in the worst movie ever made and got pissed and left because they used to set everybody down and like, okay, this is what you do. You loop your dialogue. There's like 4 people. It probably doesn't even exist anymore. But at one time when they were bringing all these imports, even the porn, there was 4 people sitting in a room in New York that were doing all the dialogue for all the import films.
Huh.
I think it was 3 men and 1 woman. Because like you hear the early Italian stuff, you always hear like the same voice on a couple films,
Yeah, yeah.
if you can remember that. And it's always the woman has the same voice. But how I found this out was I got an import porn film that I didn't put out because it was too fucked up, physically.
Yeah.
But I'm hearing the same voices on the porn film.
It's the
So
same
here's your job. You got to watch. Today you're watching this film called Black Sabbath, and this afternoon you're watching German Sluts from Hell or whatever the fuck it is. That type of shit. But hey, so I think Lena Lovitch used to do shit like that too before she started being a recording artist.
Right. Well,
She was doing, yes, I think she was doing stuff for Euro horror movies.
and I guess that's a good segue. Just speaking of bad dubbing, because the next genre I wanted to ask you about was, speaking of bad dubbing, the kung fu phase that went through the Grindhouse. Because kung fu movies were so cheap. Shaw Brothers were just cranking them out, and these distribution companies, could just buy them on the cheap and redub them. Like most of the time, not even knowing what the actual dialogue was.
It was probably the same people. And on the whole kung fu thing, I defer to the magazine to Ken Brunette, who knows a shitload more about this than I'll ever knew, because I'm real good at like delegating to people who know more than I do.
Mm-hmm.
Because I saw the basics, what the hell was it? Chinese Connection, Fist of Fury, Enter the Dragon. Of course, the one that started all, the Five Fingers of Death.
Yeah.
Flying Guillotine.
Oh, the Flying
I saw the
Guillotine's
essentials,
classic.
but to sit through some of the other shit, I was like, no fucking way. This is like, it's too much.
Yeah.
But he's really into it, and he can identify shit. So it's like I say, I believe in giving people a shot to do stuff, because like if something weird video hadn't given me a shot years ago, where would I be? So I always open shit up. If somebody wants to try something and they know more than I do, hey, go for it. I never said I'm the end all be all. I know a lot, but I don't know it all. Nobody
Yeah.
does. If anybody says they do, they're full of shit.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
I mean,
true.
I used to sit down with guys who knew actual running time with some of these films, and it got to be tedious because it was all the black and white 50s shit. And it's like certain shit was shot a certain way because they had to double feature the damn thing.
Yeah.
The problem with when we got into import and stuff is you got a 2-hour film that you want to put with a 90-minute film, and it's got to be, a certain amount of time. So we'll just shore 20 minutes off this other thing randomly. That's what they used to do. Because some shit made no sense. There's a famous story Rick Sullivan told. When Demons was running at this grindhouse down in Paterson, New Jersey, they had 2 reels interspersed and nobody picked up on it until like the 3rd day it was playing.
Really?
Yeah. But
Yeah.
then when your whole audience is consisted of dust heads, I guess, nobody would really fucking notice anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, you'd have to be high to sit through some of those kung fu flicks, though. I mean, you look at like the Bruce Lee exploitation films after he died; those things are terrible. I tried to sit down and like force myself to watch a few of them, and I couldn't even do it. Like they're just awfully shot. They're awfully made. The fight scenes barely make any sense. The choreography is just I don't know. It's just crude and all over the place.
Oh, yeah, and there was like one theater on 42nd Street that ran 3 kung fu features continuously. It was almost like the one, like the harem on the corner ran 3 porn features continuously.
Yeah. So I guess besides like the kung fu and that, I know kung fu had a big influence on the black exploitation genre, and we had mentioned some of the essential black exploitation films earlier, and we were talking about it. But what were some of the more black exploitation kung fu flicks that had come out?
The stuff I only saw the stuff with Jim Kelly. Then there was the one with the 3 chicks, Ebony, Ivory, and Jade, I think. That was it. Like I said, I wasn't really big on the martial arts stuff. It sort of like bored me because, it was like when they stuck it in the spaghetti westerns, I saw the 2 they did that with the Van Cleef, the guy from Lo Lee from Five Fingers of Death with Lee Van Cleef. They called it The Stranger and the Gunfighter, but the real title was Blood Money.
Okay.
That was good. And then the Shanghai Joe one where basically he killed Klaus Kinski with his own knives and shit. A bunch of, and they always had that thing at the end where they yanked the guy's heart out. That seemed to be a prerequisite.
Yeah, with like the claw and the chain.
Well, no, the guy would just do the kung fu move and put his hand through the guy's chest and pull out his heart and hold it up to his face. You are dying, my son. Boom. That's it.
Yeah, that was a common trope.
Yeah.
So I guess besides the horror then, or besides westerns, then you were you big on the horror genre?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I go see everything that came out. I mean, the only movie I can actually remember standing in line for was King Kong versus Godzilla in 1963.
I bet that was a disappointment just because, I don't know.
No, kids, man, we thought it was the greatest thing since fucking fried rice, man. When you're young, this shit doesn't, you don't see the flaws in this shit. I mean, okay, they were acting like 2 overage professional wrestlers on Channel 9, but fuck it, it's fun, We knew.
Yeah, I don't know. There's definitely a charm to those old Godzilla movies. I mean, any of the big bug movies or big monster movies in general. Island of Spiders, Tarantula.
Like, I was watching one the other night. It's Monster from the Green Hell. It's about giant wasps. 3/4 of the movie's made up of stock footage from an African film called Stanley and Livingston.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing. It's how much shit can you get away with? When Night of the Living Dead came out, about 3 weeks after we saw it, and I saw it on a double bill with Slaves, which I'd like to get a hold of that and just see that again. There was something came out, Vampire Beast Craves Blood and Curse of the Blood Ghouls, and we saw ghouls, there's going to be more fucking people getting eaten, this is fucking great. So we go see this fucking horrible piece of shit double bill. The Vampire Beast Craves Blood was something called Death's Head Moth. It was a fucking killer moth or something that sucks blood out of people. And Peter Cushing said the only reason he made it was because he needed money for his wife's medical bills. And then Curse of the Blood Ghouls was a retitled Slaughters of the Vampires, which was just on Channel 9 a week ago. And that sucked hugely. So we're like, okay. So you had to watch out for retitled shit too,
Yeah. Well, I mean, if they can get away with it, they might as well just retitle it or just add some more stock footage in and change it up completely.
Well, they had the best one was, 5 horror happenings, and the Goofy Monsters of Spook City was number 5. So we thought we were going to see 5 horror movies.
Yeah.
First movie was The Haunted Palace. Okay, that's cool. Love The Haunted Palace. I mean, Lon Chaney, Vincent Price. How can you go wrong?
Yeah.
Second movie was Tales of Terror, which was also the 3rd, 4th, and 5th movie because the Tales of Terror was 3 different segments. That's how they fucked us.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, some of these ones would run like, especially the drive-ins. The drive-ins would run shit like Spend an Evening with Clint Eastwood, all 4 movies. And I can remember going to see that with a 6-pack, a bunch of rolled joints and a tape recorder to record the music from it because it wasn't out anywhere.
Yeah.
And then seeing the sun go up and going to work half shit-faced, that was a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I gotta say, I definitely miss the drive-in vibe because I don't know. When I was in high school, we used to go to the drive-in whenever we couldn't find anywhere to go party. So we just throw a keg in the trunk, and we get like 5-6 cars load of people, just go to the drive-in because we know that we could be there till like 3 o'clock in the morning, and no one would really bat an eye.
It's coming back now. There's one. I think it's about an hour from me. They're going to run 35 millimeter prints of The Evil Dead and Zombie.
It was, I had just heard, and I was out of town. I couldn't make it. But Bruce Campbell had rented out a drive-in about an hour and a half south from me in Alton, Illinois, in the middle of nowhere. And they did they basically did like a horror con there. They they did 2 nights of all the Evil Dead movies, and I think they showed Bubba Hotep as well.
Yeah. Yeah, they're making a comeback.
I mean, I guess that's one good thing that we can say from the whole COVID situation is that certain types of media are going to come back because I don't know, there's just something about the drive-in, and even going back to the 50s, the drive-in is where you just go and drink and make out with your date, but I don't know. I mean, there's just like a certain aesthetic to that. We're getting to the end of the show, so I just want to have you mention, a few of the books that you've put out. I know they're all available on Amazon for the most part. There was the Grindhouse Purgatory. That's your magazine. Did you have any new issues coming out?
You can get it. Issues 1 to 3 are out of print, but we condensed the best of them in like Grindhouse Purgatory's greatest hits. So any of this stuff you can get on Amazon, or if you want to email me at grindhousepurgatory@gmail.com. It's my email address. You can get it from me direct, which sometimes helps the cause because Amazon don't give you shit on the royalties and stuff. A Whole Bag of Crazy is my autobiography, which we can talk about at a later date. But yeah. I was really amazed how well it went over. You can get that from me also. You said about the trivia book. We have that 42nd Street Pete's Big Book of Grindhouse Trivia. This fictional thing I wrote, The Gunfighters of the Drunken Master. There's a trilogy there, and then shitload of DVDs on AfterHoursCinema.com, or you can email me directly for those. So it's all good. And then I have the Grindhouse Purgatory channel on YouTube, which people are starting to like, and it's friends are helping me do it. It's sporadic because of what's going on, because I'm not a tech guy. I suck at tech, and I shoot the things, throw them the SIM card, and they take care of it, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at right now. So, hey, thanks for having me on, man. It's been a blast. We can do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to have you on, and definitely going to reach out to you again because I'd like to refer to both your Kung Fu expert and your Spaghetti Western expert. But, folks, definitely go to his YouTube channel. That is 42nd Street Pete. Grindhouse Purgatory is also the name of the channel. And give him a like, give him a subscribe, check out the website. And, if you're interested in, looking up more Grindhouse films or just the history of independent films in general, Pete is a wealth of information, so feel free to reach out to him, shoot him an email, and I would definitely recommend picking up one of his books. I'm probably going to be picking up the Big Book of Grindhouse Trivia because I want to know about 10% of what he does. Pete, I want to thank you for coming on the show. It's been a blast as well.
Okay, my pleasure, Jimmy. You take care.
Awesome. You have a great one because we are out of here.